if they get elected as leaders, having made promises which in fact they're never going to fulfil, then we're going to go back into the vicious cycle of trust destruction. And the general opinion of the wider electorate is going to be, these people just lie to us. They say anything that comes into their head. Johnson's departure has exposed, and I always knew this was going to happen, that there are significant ideological divisions within the party, and that the party membership is not necessarily representative of the Conservative Party voters. And so what you're getting is lots of internal tensions. And because the Conservative Party has abandoned some of its anchor points, constitution, upholding the institutions of the state, even, you pick up republicanism in the Conservative Party, which I find quite surprising to me, but I've noticed it occasionally. Because of that, the things that hold people together within a coalition, and that's what all our national political parties are not there anymore. So, and Johnson, of course, has made it much, much worse. So he goes, sigh of relief, certainly from me. But it then exposes that these people really don't get on very well, and that the respect which you'd normally expect to see between them, you only have to look at the attacks on Penny Mordaunt. Leave aside whether she's the right person for the Conservative Party to have. All seems to me to show an extraordinary level of vitriol.
Is that a political split, or is it a power split between the attacks on Penny Mordaunt come from the Mail? Partly they seem to be supporting an alternative candidate.
I think it's partly power, because they've got used to this form of behaviour, because it's happened in the past, and these things tend to repeat themselves until you break the cycle. And partly, I think it is ideological. I think the ideological differences are much greater, or at least much harder to manage. They've always been present. When I got elected in 1997, you knew you had colleagues who had views which were probably on many subjects rather different from your own. But you held together, and there was a degree of amity and respect, and we seem to have lost that, and Brexit made it worse. Firstly, the members are ageing, whereas actually the voters in my constituency were often very much younger. On Brexit, I'm sure that there was a majority in my association in favour of Brexit, but equally there was a constituency which voted by a narrow margin Remain. So there are differences on that. I think it's easy to exaggerate it, because ultimately people do mix in and do other things within the constituency. They're not just... And you should also need to remember that in any association, if you've got 1,200 members, the actual numbers who are ever going to turn up to an event at any time is probably no more than 250 or 300.
And they're the activists.
They're the activists. So the Remainer pay the sub because, broadly speaking, they support the Conservative Party and they think it's worthwhile making a financial contribution.
When we looked at Boris Johnson's campaign to be leader, 70% were very high net worth individuals in trades in the city or financial services. Do you think the money's ultimately skewing the ideology? Maybe I'll ask you that first, Dominic. When you're a Conservative candidate or an MP and, there's ERG, there's various groups offering money, does that affect the way you think and vote who the donors are?
I think it certainly affected Johnson. Whether it will continue to affect the Conservative Party in the same way now he's gone, one of the reasons I'm very pleased he's gone is that I hope that may be one of the changes that we'll see. But that may be a pious aspiration. There's no doubt that Johnson's connections, the way he's dealt with donors, the favouritism, the really quite overt cultivation is unusual.
How would you summarise what the Johnson era was about? Was it just about populism? Was it almost about authoritarianism? And which bits of that legacy are going to be carried forward, do you think?
It was certainly about populism, because it was dependent on a constant series of offers to the public which responded to their instincts, sometimes their prejudices, and said, we understand this and we are going to accommodate it, although he was running out of promises by the end. And I think that's one of the reasons why the public started to realise that this was a charlatan and he was making a whole series of promises that were unfulfillable. But the legacy is very bad, because changing that narrative getting people to listen to the idea that moderate ideas might work needs trust. And as he's destroyed trust, that's the thing he's done more than anything else. I mean, other politicians have done it before his time, but it's a real acceleration of that. So the new politicians who want to follow him, what do? Do they try to emulate him? And you can see some of that coming out in this leadership campaign. Do they try to tell the public, particularly Conservative members, what they think the truth is, in which case they're not going to get elected as leaders, because these people are, I'm afraid, still got, in my view, mistaken views of what is possible and what is desirable for a Conservative government to deliver. And if they get elected as leaders, having made promises which in fact they're never going to fulfil, then we're going to go back into the vicious cycle of trust destruction. And the general opinion of the wider electorate is going to be, these people just lie to us. They say anything that comes into their head. It's one thing. You know, the big change in politics, in the old days, politicians made promises, they were genuine, and then they sometimes couldn't fulfill them. Well, that's the good cynicism about healthy democracy. But that's not where we are now. Now it is they're lying to us. They just say what they want in order to get our vote, and then they will renege on it, and they knew at the time they said it that they were going to have to do that. And that's very dangerous. And who is going to break that cycle? Is it going to be a Conservative Prime Minister who suddenly has the courage to do it and succeeds and sees off in the process elements of the press who encourage this behaviour? Or is it going to be the leader of another political party? Or is it never going to happen? In which case I do despair as to where we're going to end up.